Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. A number of public figures have come in defense of former University of Witwatersrand vice-chancellor Professor Adam Habib following the controversy of his use of the N-word. Former public protector Thuli Madonsela, Justice Malala, Palesa, Morudu and Barney have called for Habib's reinstatement as director at the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies without delay. In an article published on Wednesday, Madonsela, Malala, Morudu and Pityana noted that Habib exercised poor judgment in saying the N-word, but that he is not racist. Last month, Habib stepped aside as director at the university, as the university investigates his use of the American racial slur while addressing students during a webinar. Now, a motion of no confidence in Habib was also recently passed. Joining me now is a former public protector, Thuli Madonsela. A very good afternoon to you and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the privilege.
Now, Professor, let's start off with your reaction to that video of Professor Adam Habib uttering the N-word and the subsequent hashtag Habib must fall that was circulated by mostly Wits University students.
As we've said in the article that was led by Palesa Morudu, the use of the word or the N-word by Professor Adam Habib was misadvised, and we do not condone that. And my initial reaction was the same, that he exercised poor judgment and lacked the social intelligence necessary for him to understand the new context within which he operates and the emotions that go with certain words that are historically associated with denigrating and stigmatizing African groups, women, and other historically disadvantaged groups. So that's how I felt that it was improper for him to have done that. I thought the reaction, on the other hand, was also excessive. Certainly there had to be a reaction, and the students understandably reacted with anger, because in the environment this word is not supposed to be used. But Adam Habib used it in the context of being an academic. Somebody uses the word, says the N-word, but there are no consequences for people who use the N-word in this institution. That's a complaint. He then frames it in such a way that everyone understands what is the framework, what is the N-word, and he mentions the word, as Obama did once, by the way. And then there is extreme reaction to that, understandably, because in the context of those students, this word is not supposed to be used. And I think he should have retreated faster than he did. But following that, there should be a discourse with him engaging about what words are supposed to be used and not used, even in an academic context, even in a clarification context, and then build from this. This should be an opportunity to understand why is this word emotive. Those of us who have been dealing with race, not now that it's fashionable, those of us who have been dealing with racial issues since we were teenagers, we understand why is it a problem. But some of the people who are reacting to Adam Habib don't give they don't give anything. They don't care about racism. They just want him to go because as a journalist and as an academic, he has used his voice to speak against corruption.
And just speaking about the context aspect of it, in the article defending Professor Habib, a reference is being made to a U.S. state of Oklahoma sports announcer, Matt Rowan, who was caught on a hot microphone during a basketball game saying that he hopes Norman gets their A kicked, and then he also said the F word and the N word, and later on apologized, blaming diabetes, and he still holds his position.
Exactly. That example was brought into the article by Palesa to show the difference between people who make mistakes and people who are racist. By saying Adam Habib is a racist and he must go, we're now putting him in the same bracket as somebody who is intentionally and openly racist. And this is what I refer to as binary thinking in a highly complex world. binary thinkers want us to believe that there's only just two categories. And I've actually experienced a little bit of what Adam Habib is going through now. When I said Clicks was guilty of unconscious bias. And the binary thinkers wanted to then suggest that once you say something is unconscious bias, then it's not bad, it's not racist, you're defending that person. What you're saying is that life is a spectrum. There is right and wrong, but in between there are gray areas. And he found himself getting unintentionally into that gray area. And how we deal with his mistake should not be the same way as we deal with that openly racist and intentionally harmful person.
Now, Professor, I want us to also talk about the definition of who a black person is. According to the article, a black person is not defined by the degree of pigmentation in their skin. An article also quotes Steve Biko's book, which says that being black is a reflection of a mental attitude.
Well, absolutely. Well, in South Africa, for example, you black because during apartheid, as long as you had a drop of blackness, as long as you were not white, you were regarded as black. And as we are now regrouping and advancing equality, we are forced to somehow to recognize everyone who was put in that category. Indians, those who came through indentured labor, and even those that didn't come through indentured labor were treated in the same category of non-white. So Steve Biko speaks from that perspective, firstly, of how people were oppressed as one generic group of black people. I do disagree, though, with the people who say there's no hierarchy of oppression. There is a hierarchy of oppression. Even if you talk about land, they were talking about land in Parliament recently. For example, they showed you the percentage of land, how land is owned 72% by whites, and then the distinctions between the black categories. So we're not saying, by saying everyone is black, we say there are no distinctions within that blackness. But Adam Habib is correct in talking about we, because in the context of South Africa, in Steve Biko's South Africa, black is a category of oppressed people and is a category of people who are conscious of that oppression and are conscious of their right to be treated as equal human beings like any other.
Now, you also mentioned that, in not thinking that Professor Habib is racist, you mentioned that he also fought against apartheid and he also suffered oppression, during that time because of the broader definition of who a black person was in apartheid South Africa. And you mentioned earlier on that he made a miscalculation, he should have actually apologized earlier, and that there's an overreaction on the punishment that he's receiving currently. What do you think would be a more fitting way to punish him then for his transgressions?
I don't think, again, the approach should be a binary one between punishment and non-punishment. I don't think he deserves any punishment. I think he deserves an engagement around understanding the context within which he's operating around harm. That harm is harm, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And as leaders in organizations and in social spaces, we need the emotional intelligence to be aware of the emotions of others and therefore deal with them, meet them where they are. We also need the social intelligence to understand the dynamics, the social dynamics in any group. For example, the N word in South Africa is offensive, but it's not as highly emotive as in America, where the people experienced this. But even in America, it's different how people react. The reaction that we've seen now to Adam Habib is not the same reaction that we got to President Obama when he used it. And of course, Adam Habib is being told you can't use this because you're not part of that history. And he needs to know that. But it's not just going to be the N word. It's going to be words that are offensive towards women, people with disabilities, Jewish people, people within the LGBTQI community. We just need to understand that words can harm. I don't agree with those who are saying free speech means you can say whatever you want. I don't, because I do know that words can harm sometimes harder than blunt force.
And also, you know, in the article, there's talk of the impact of the trend or cancel culture on things like movies, books, and even academic curricula that contain the N-word or that contain some of the oppressive words that you're mentioning in the categories of, you know, whether it's against women or against a religion or against a gender. Just speak to us a bit about that thought process that, you know, if this culture continues, then perhaps certain books will have to be removed from the shelves or certain movies will have to be reshot or edited.
I understand where that it comes from. It's newfound power, the power to fight back against an oppressive system. However, the manner in which the fight back is carried out is counterproductive. I do think that words that were used in a context where people did not intend to harm, but it was the manner of things at the time, we don't need to resort to cancel culture to deal with those. We need to contextualize and use those books, those movies and documentaries to engage in why it was wrong even then to use those words, but people use them because the context had not allowed the kind of awakening that we now have. For example, I have a book, there's a book that was produced about Charlotte McClegg. The W. Du Bois speaks about themselves as Negroes because at the time people used those words for themselves. South Africans called themselves natives, but today the N-word, we know that it is offensive because it was meant to offend. And therefore, I don't think cancel culture is the answer. In any event, cancel culture suppresses the debate. You don't want the debate on bigotry to be suppressed. You want it to come to the fore so that we can engage on what do we consider to be right and wrong, and why is it wrong? Who does it harm, and how does it maintain the toxic racial, gender, national, and other power relations in society?
Well, let's leave it there for this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for that conversation. That was Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector and currently professor of law at Stellenbosch University.